Hello, my name is Father Matthew Schneider. I'm a priest of the Legionaries of Christ. I live down a bit in Philadelphia, but I was originally invited up to celebrate the Masses and give a homily for the 5th Sunday of Lent, March 28th to 29th, 2020, after parish. I know Deacon Greg Candra from a lot of online writing, and so he, Bishop Sanchez, and all the other clergy and parish invited me to come and give a homily for you all. Unfortunately, we had this coronavirus and I can't travel and public masses aren't even happening, so I decided to record the homily on video here for you all. The gospel passage is the raising of Lazarus. If you want to go and find it, it's the 11th chapter of St. John, 1 to 43. And so that's going to be the context. If you want to go and read it, you can. I'm not going to list it out precisely. So hopefully that gives you a good introduction so you know who I am, what's all going on. So let's begin. Jesus went out to Lazarus' tomb and he said, "Come forth." And Lazarus goes, "I don't see 3 other people in here." And maybe you laugh, maybe you get a little bit of a snicker there. But why? Because we all recognize that sound, forth, has 2 meanings. And even though we use the number meaning more often, first, second, third, fourth, we realize from context that what's meant is the other one, directional, come forth, come forward. And so with that, we all understand that we each process in a similar way. But sometimes we realize other people don't process things in the same way. When you meet somebody who's colorblind and they're like, "I can't see the difference between those things," you're like, "These are obviously different colors." Like, it's not even like a question. But they lack that. When I was diagnosed with autism in my 30s, it was kind of like as if I had been colorblind my whole life and I hadn't realized it. I had just assumed that everybody else was better at distinguishing those 2 colors, and I just had worked at it and somehow managed to do it okay. I know in social relationships I managed to do it okay, but I did it consciously. I did a lot of things consciously that a lot of other people do subconsciously. Now, why am I here this weekend? This weekend is the week before World Autism Awareness Day, which is on Thursday, April 2nd. Obviously, next Sunday is Palm Sunday, so it wouldn't be a great thing to talk about it on Palm Sunday. That's kind of a more important celebration, so we put it the Sunday before rather than the Sunday after. But I think the story of Lazarus presents us with a great example of how we as Catholics can treat autistics. And I want to go over it in 3 points. The 3 points are how Jesus acted, and 3 points of how Jesus acted and how we can respond, how we can react in a similar way with autistic people. And for this, I posted online asking autistic people what they wanted other Catholics to know. And so obviously these are from people who, go to Mass or at least try to, who pray, who are serious in their Catholic faith, who are connected with a priest on social media. So these are Catholic autistics who want other Catholics to know certain things about them. So we notice that Jesus met people where they were. When the centurion came, Jesus cured from a distance because he knew that it would feel awkward going into his house. He would feel he had that faith. And when he comes here, Martha and Mary are different. One runs out, one stays home and prays. And oftentimes when we see the people who are disabled, people who are autistic, we can see them as that other and not see them for who they are. Bob Quinlan, who works for the National Catholic Partnership on Disabilities, mentioned this. He said, regarding people with disabilities, I'm not just trying to help them out in one way to channel that comes back to me and helps me, but I want to help them become good. I want to help them give back as they can. And I think that is a real way we can meet people who are autistic, who have other disabilities, is to see how can this person give? How can this person serve the church? How can this person be a full member of the church? Not just, how can I make it so that this person isn't really awkward? So I have a few quotations from different autistics who wanted to present things about this. One mother said, "Autistics are paying attention at Mass. They are listening and are reverent, even if they are moving or stimming. And my son says he really taking in the Mass, the prayers, worship seriously, even if you see a movie around." So a lot of times you'll see the autistics stimming, playing with a little fidget thing or things like that, which help us to regulate our sensory input, because we don't have as much subconscious sensory filters in our brain. So we need to put external ones to make it work right. You might even notice in this homily that I've been swaying back and forth, because that is one of the stims that I do a lot, is kind of, based on the balance and moving from back and forth from foot to foot. And usually it's relatively unseen, relatively inawkward for others. I try and do ones that are less awkward because I try to be charitable to you as well. And several others echoed this. Some mentioned how they might wear sunglasses. They might wear clothes that aren't quite as fancy, because sometimes the sensitivity of touch is really affected by certain clothes or certain fabrics, so they can only wear certain fabrics without really just being, awkward and anxious the whole of Mass, which, I'd rather somebody come in sweats and not be anxious than come in a suit and be anxious. I know, for example, most of us, even myself, we tend to cut off all our tags on the back of our necks because they tend to scratch and they feel almost like, like a rose bush scratching against our neck or things like that. We, as autistic Catholics, want to be Christ's disciples too, fully involved in the mission of the church. This is quoting somebody else. And fully part of the fellowship that is in the church. We are called just as much as everyone else. And so we can grade volunteers behind the scene. I know somebody who's autistic who is able to be a good accountant and keeps track of the books for a whole bunch of Catholic organizations. Small, medium-sized ones, not like huge diocesan level, but ones where you need a volunteer to help keep the books in order. And not everybody's great at that. And you find somebody who is good at that, and that's how they can serve. Now that leads us to point 2. Jesus cared for each individually and treated, and we see how he treated Martha and Mary differently. We see Martha running to him, and how did Jesus treat him? I'm the resurrection and life. We see Mary waiting at home. How does Jesus treat her? He treats her with a brace. That's the one time we see Jesus crying, and then he goes out with her to her brothers too. And so it is also important to note that autistics have different struggles. Many obviously would not be able to preach this homily. Some can't even talk or can barely talk. Some would be annoyed by the different sets of lights here. One of the most famous autistics, who's a university professor, mentions that the recess lights, the type of lighting we have here, I don't know if you can see this on video, just bothers him, and he has to wear a ball cap because that type of lighting bothers him in a specific way. And those type of things vary a lot person to person. I even got 2 different reactions from autistics about this, about eye contact at things like the sign of peace or right after Mass. One who said, yeah, please be charitable with my son. If he doesn't really make eye contact or just goes briefly to your eyes and then looks away, he's not trying to be rude, he's just trying not to overwhelm himself. And somebody else said, look, even though a lot of autistics have this issue, I really don't. I can look people in the eyes, no problem. And so you have to realize that each person, each autistic is different. And we have to be aware of what those differences need as far as accommodations. And sometimes accommodations are not just so they can manage it by, but so that they're welcome, so that they're able to fully contribute. Take myself, for example. I found out I was autistic after kind of failing as a school chaplain, where I wasn't picking up the kids' emotions and things like that. That was what led to my being diagnosed. I was not a great school chaplain. And now with this knowledge, and obviously if I was planning to be at your parish for the weekend, I'm able to do that. I'm able to get through that. But it's a struggle. But how much am I able to contribute? And so with that, talking with my superiors, I went to the path of, hey, let's look at becoming like a professor or a writer, because that's where I seem to excel, and it takes less kind of social reading than it would to be a pastor or a school chaplain or a spiritual director for a retreat center or something like that, which is the type of things that people in my community tend to do more often. And that's an adaptation that uses my skills because my nickname when I was in the seminary was schneiderpedia, which is obviously a sense of like me having encyclopedic knowledge. Even today, my community sometimes jokes about how good my memory is. It's really odd because we autistics tend to have not the best short-term memory, but like once something got to long-term memory, it's never lost. So it's like I might forget like something you told me 5 minutes ago, but if I remember that thing 48 hours later, I'm going to remember it 20 years later, type thing. So that's a really different way to see. So and one autistic one tell parishioners that we see, hear, and think everything differently from others. So we're going to perceive things like the reading, the music, the homily, and the prayers differently. And I think that's very interesting. It's really interesting how in recent research it seems to say that the variety of the 98% or so of the population is not autistic in how their brain is structured is smaller than the variety within the 1.5–2% of the population is not autistic, who has a much wider variety in how our brain's structured. So to really look at those type of things, look at things like how much light people have, because, for example, in autism, irregularities in sense sensitivity is one of the diagnostic criteria, but those could be hyposensitive or hypersensitive, or even narrow range. I know for myself, for light, I like my office to have like really bright lights compared to an average office. But then when I go outside, I'm one of the first people to put on sunglasses because my ideal light range for not having issues, I think, is smaller than most people, where most people can handle much less light and much more light than I can without too much issues in processing and things. And fortunately, my range is well within, it's normal that, it's sunny outside, I put on my sunglasses. Very few people are going to complain about that. It's sunny. And yeah, maybe you put them on a little before I do, but that doesn't seem like super awkward or super odd. Some autistics have to wear sunglasses inside, and that starts to look a little odd, but we have to accept them and respect them. And finally, the third point, Jesus transformed Lazarus. Through helping him, Jesus completely transformed Lazarus from dead to alive again. Obviously, we aren't dead. I'm not dead. I'm alive here. But so often people on the spectrum, people with other disabilities, are kind of sidelined in the church. And that's something that we really need to deal with. One autistic noted how we can actually do things, we as autistics can actually do things that are rude, uncharitable due to our lack of social understanding. He said, don't presume malice, even if we do serious harm. Don't treat our little mistakes like huge sins when we make them. When we fail, it's because we lack skills rather than we lack the desire to please. Because so often I've noticed afterwards, because somebody's told me, oh, that was rude, or that was a little bit TMI, or things like that, too much information, or things like that. And it wasn't that I was intentionally trying to be rude. I was trying to be nice, but I slipped up. And I really appreciate when people can realize, okay, like, he's trying, and this isn't his strength, and he slipped up a bit, and he admits it. So, continuing on, another autistic wanted to talk about the challenge of going to Mass, and she said, I want to be present at every Mass. It can be so overwhelming, though, between the people and the sensory overload. Sometimes I get so overwhelmed, and I don't know what to do. Please be patient. And sometimes speaking to other parishioners is just more than I can handle. So she just kind of runs out of the parish right after Mass. And it's not that she is trying to avoid you socially. Maybe at some other time she might talk for a bit with people socially, or if she was talk one-on-one. But after all the social aspect of going to Mass, all the kind of sensory things, she's about to have what's called a shutdown or a meltdown, which you probably don't want to have in public, which are kind of reactions that autistic people can have to too much sensation. And usually by the time we're older or adults, we can realize when they're coming on and get ourselves out of a situation, either so that it doesn't happen or so that it at least happens in a non-public place, so that it's not causing issues for others. Because if we're trying to be charitable, we'll try and avoid having those kind of things happen in public, because it's really awkward for you, it's really awkward for us. Finally, one spoke about autistic prayer. Please don't dismiss our spiritual and mystical experiences just because we are autistics. A lot of times when I talk about my spiritual experiences, they're dismissed as me just being mentally unstable because I'm autistic. That's what the person said. And I think that that is something to be aware of, because yes, we as autistics do have a higher rate of anxiety and depression, but we do not have, as far as I know, a higher rate of kind of things where we have issues of, delusions and things like that. And somebody who's anxious, somebody who's depressed can still pray. In fact, prayer is a very helpful means to try and relieve some of that anxiety, some of that depression. And hopefully these changes of attitudes can really help autistics integrate better in the parishes. Obviously, there's other aspects that we can work on, how we present the gospel in an autistic way, how we present autistic prayer. I've been working on a few of these, and a few others are working on them. I'm more working on the autistic prayer. A lady called Amy Murphy O'Connor, who runs the Autism Consecrate, is working more on explaining it to the autistic mind, kind of going through the Baltimore Catechism and re-explaining parts in an autistic manner, which is helpful as well. So hopefully this all helps. We have to remember that God loves everyone. He calls each of us to love Him and love others. It does not depend on whether the one who is loved or the one who is loving is autistic or not. And so let's look at each person around and try to love them in a way that helps them. And loving each person, we may need to ask what they need. Such love will transform both us and them.